Welcome to Revenge of the Drive-In, the podcast where Jim and Patrick cover two movies randomly selected from a list of over 2,000. We usually talk about horror movies, action movies, low-budget, cult movies, and, well, I guess now we're doing porn, because we've got Emmanuelle. And, Jim, what are we going with the title for the second movie? It's got a few different titles.
I like Superdragon versus Superman. That's what I like.
Yeah, that's what IMDb has. Tubi has Bruce Lee versus Superman. I think Letterboxd has Bruce Lee against Supermen.
Yeah,
so
also
any combination of either Bruce Lee or Superdragon and Superman or Superman, and then either against or versus any kind of any synonym.
Well, you can also swap out Superman and Supermen.
And guess what? Bruce Lee's not in it, so we'll get into that because it is a bruceploitation flick, which is something, a genre, a movement of film that we talked about a bit with Game of Death. I've been looking forward to covering one. At the time when we did Game of Death, I hadn't even seen a single bruceploitation film. I have since seen The Clones of Bruce Lee, but I think that's the only other one. The Clones of Bruce Lee might be the most famous one, because that stars, I believe, I think I saw it referred to as the Mount Rushmore of bruceploitation actors. It stars the Big Four. There's Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee was the one in Pieces. He's the Kung Fu professor.
Yes, okay, yeah.
There's Bruce Lee, who's the one in this film. I think there's a Bruce Leon, and I don't remember. Maybe the fourth one doesn't really have a Bruce Lee name. All that having been said, let's start with the bigger hit of the first of the two films, and that is Emmanuelle. Believe it or not, this was an X-rated film that was a huge hit. And before we really discuss the plot, I think this movie begs the question, or it begs for a discussion here. And I'm not sure this is a discussion I want to have with you, okay. And I'm not sure it's a discussion that our audience wants to listen to. But is softcore pornography truly pornography? That's really the biggest question I think I have with Emmanuelle.
Well, here, because actually I was thinking about that as well. Because I think a lot of younger people, early 20s, I don't think they understand that there's different kinds of porn. And I don't mean like hardcore or like bondage, stuff like that. I mean like you had like softcore porn and then you had porn, right?
Right. Now, I didn't know this. I didn't know the difference between... because you hear the term hardcore. You don't really hear the term softcore a lot unless you like go out of your way to look for stuff. So I had never really known the difference until I saw some of the Emmanuelle movies. And apparently the difference, and there may be more than one difference, but the main difference I'm seeing is that in softcore pornography, you do not see the acts of penetration.
Yes, yeah.
I think in softcore porn, or maybe some softcore, maybe most softcore, they're not actually having unsimulated sex. I'm not certain of that. I don't think this was one of them, but I know some of the Emmanuelle movies, and definitely some of the black Emmanuelle movies, which I'm a huge fan of, have both softcore and hardcore edits.
Okay.
And so I would imagine if a film has both a softcore and a hardcore edit, they're not shooting different sex scenes. They're just including shots, and they're editing it differently for the hardcore version than the softcore version. That having been said, I don't believe this had a hardcore version, so I don't think they're having unsimulated sex, but I'm not really sure.
This movie does cross a line, but I think the first sex that we see in the movie is Emmanuelle with her husband.
Yeah, and it's
classic.
Jean. It's covered by the nightshade they have over the bed. I mean, we get some close-ups and stuff, but like it's shot. It's a passionate sex scene, and there's probably more passionate noises being made than in like a normal drama movie that would have a sex scene. But it's not too dissimilar otherwise from something that would be in an R-rated film.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I agree with you. It's shot in a classy way for the most part.
It is hard to distinguish kind of art from porn, or porn from art, I guess, at a certain level.
Well, it's been a huge issue in the Supreme Court has looked at this, and obviously everyone's talking about the Supreme Court now, at least when we're recording this. But, goodness, I don't know if this was a lawyer or a justice, and if it was a judge, I don't know if it was a Supreme Court justice, but there's the famous definition of porn. This was like a legal definition of porn in America. The definition was, I know it when I see it. And that sounds funny, and that sounds like a cop-out, but at the same time, it's pretty accurate, and it might be the best way to distinguish porn from art.
Yeah.
which means it's
Yeah.
completely subjective. And, and then I think something like this film, I'm not sure between the two. There's also, from the 1930s, I think the 1934 or so, there's the Supreme Court case, the United States of America versus one book called Ulysses. Of course, Ulysses being the greatest novel ever written. Mm-hmm. The worst mistake the American government ever made, in my opinion, was banning the book Ulysses. They seized imports of it because it was deemed pornographic. This was a book written in the teens and 20s, published in full in the 20s, published in parts going back to like 1916. There's a pretty graphic depiction of masturbation, and there's a lot of like sex stuff in it. Mm-hmm. But the Supreme Court ruled, and this was like a effort to distinguish art from pornography, and that art can have pornographic elements or pornographic details without being pornographic. And I think if we think of more modern film, you have something like the film Love from director Gaspar Noé, which came out probably about 10 years ago now. I think it's a terrible movie, first of all. Like, I'm not but Gaspar Noé, for the most part, is a well-regarded director. He's one of those artsy-fartsy kind of, I don't like him, but he's made a bunch of boundary-pushing movies, very European movies. I think he's from Argentina originally, but he makes like French movies and stuff. And so European movies equal lots of sex for the most part. We'll see that in Emmanuelle.
And drug use.
Well, I don't know if that's a specific European thing, but that's definitely a Gaspar Noé thing. Well, and there is drug use in Emmanuelle, to be fair. But the movie Love has a lot of sex scenes in it, and it has unsimulated sex scenes. But that, by and large, I'm sure there's some people out there that consider it a pornographic film, but for the most part, that's considered an art house film, not a pornographic film, and yet it has features in it that have, for the most part, been regarded as being pornographic. I think going back to the 1970s, so this was the era of Emmanuelle, the porno chic era, as it's been described. Don't Look Now, with Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie. There is unsimulated sex in that, and that is regarded not just as an art house film, but as one of the greatest films of all time. It's an incredible masterpiece of what I'll call backdoor horror, kind of like Audition, where it's a drama for 90% of the movie, and then it becomes a horror movie. So there is a fine line, and it's a finer line than a lot of us might think between art and porn. And Emmanuelle is all over that line, really, to a point where I'm not really sure how I feel about it at the end of the day.
Well, you know what it actually reminds me of? I don't know if you're familiar with these, but when I was a young teen, staying up past bedtime,
Red Shoe Diaries?
Yeah, exactly, Red Shoe Diaries.
Yeah, I've never seen it, but I'm familiar with what it is.
Yeah, it reminds me exactly of Red Shoe Diaries.
Red Shoe Diaries was a television show, but I think there were essentially, it's an anthology. I think each episode was essentially a movie, if that sounds right.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, simulated sex scenes, not genuine hardcore sex scenes, not shot in a hardcore way.
Very softcore.
But was still deemed pornographic in a way, in the softcore way. The other thing I want to mention, going back to legal definitions or whatever, but I was in a criminal justice class in high school, and this girl who I knew was in it, and she I think, I don't know what exactly was being discussed, but the pornography in some way was brought up in how the criminal justice system looked at pornography, and she said something like nowadays Playboy isn't even really porn. When Playboy came out, it was like the pornography. It was like but like now, with all the stuff that's out there in the internet, and even like Hustler and some of the other pornographic magazines were far more explicit than Playboy.
Yeah.
Like, Playboy is nothing. And I'm like, is Emmanuelle the Playboy to Deep Throat's Hustler? Maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I think what you brought up is really interesting, and I'd agree. I would totally agree.
So you've seen Deep Throat, is what you're saying?
I've seen bits and pieces.
No, yeah, I've never seen it, but
I've seen the important bits and pieces.
Yeah. So again, porno chic era, the 70s. Deep Throat was a big hit that came out in 72, 73, somewhere around there. I remember seeing something on TV years ago, and Deep Throat, it's a pornographic film. It's an X-rated film. It's a hardcore pornographic film, but it was like a big hit. Some estimates, and I think these are insane estimates, I think they're fucking wrong, but some estimates have it as like making more money than Jaws, but they couldn't really accurately like some say it was like the first blockbuster, really, but like I think because it played in theaters forever, and then Emmanuelle, by the way, it played in French theaters for like 13 years or something.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Another kind of instance like that, but like I think they just didn't really have accurate box office takes for something like a Deep Throat. And then, but Deep Throat, I think, was the kind of the first real big one. There's also Beyond the Door with Marilyn Chambers. Linda Lovelace, I think, was in Deep Throat. Debbie Does Dallas was around this time. I think that's the mid-'70s. So, like, all these classic, for lack of a better term, porno titles. And then Emmanuelle is kind of right in the middle of this. But it's this weirdo thing. It's French. It's European, which is another reason, I think, why we might tend to think of it more as an art film than porn. Because it's a foreign film, and I at least watched the subtitle version. There is an English dub version, apparently. I learned that because the IMDb trivia said that Sylvia Christel, the actress, I think she's Dutch, she was apparently very upset that she was not reached out to do the English dub because she spoke fluent English. So it's like,
really?
I didn't even know there was a dubbed version. But so this was a huge hit in France. It was a reasonable hit in the United States, and it has its place in cultural history. It is the inspiration for Rochelle in Seinfeld, which is
from Milan to Minsk.
One woman's erotic journey from Milan to Minsk. The Emmanuelle movies usually are like travel, adventures. This one is just about all takes place in Bangkok, which there is an Emmanuelle in Bangkok, but that is a 1M Emmanuelle film, which means it's a black Emmanuelle film. That's another thing. That's really the main thing that interests me about the Emmanuelle films, is that this, think of it now, like a movie like this wouldn't be a huge hit. I mean,
no.
Honestly, a movie like this wouldn't be released.
Well, today,
right.
if this exact movie was released again today, I think a lot of people would call it very tame. But if they had remade this movie beat for beat,
which there is a remake being planned, by the way.
Really?
I think it's a female director, maybe a director I'm not familiar with, but there is talks of Léa Seydoux playing Emmanuelle.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd watch that, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I mean, but again, mainstream actress. They're going for a mainstream actress, obviously not a weird porn actress, but a Bond girl in this case. One of the few repeat Bond girls, actually. She's in 2 movies, just like Eunice Gayson, who plays Sylvia Trench, and then Maude Adams, different characters, but she's in 2 Bond movies as well, because she's Octopussy, and she's, I don't know which of the other ones she's in, but I think she's in maybe The Man with the Golden Gun or something. Yeah,
I'll say yes. I don't remember, but I know the actress, yeah.
Okay, so Emmanuelle, released in 1974, directed by, and I'm only going to say what his name is probably supposed to be pronounced as one time because there's a much funnier version to pronounce it. Joost Yakin?
Probably Yakin. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a French name, but I thought it was Dutch. I got it reversed. I thought Sylvia Christel was French. I thought the director was Dutch. It's actually the other way around. But you'd think Just, that seems like a Dutch name.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe, immigration happens within Europe, obviously. But it's much funnier to think of his name as just Jackin', especially because this is not the only softcore pornographic film he made. I believe he made The Story of O, which is another Sylvia Christel movie, I believe. He made a few other movies that I'm familiar with. He might have made one of the Lady Chatterley movies, because there were a few like softcore Lady Chatterley movies in the 70s. So just Jackin', he's the director. Sylvia Christel is the star. She's not top billed, which surprised me. This is essentially her breakout movie. I don't know if it's her first movie. She's a very young woman here. I think she's about 21 years old or so, which actually kind of caught me by surprise because I thought most of the time she looked much older than that. But I also think that's just how she's dressed and made up, because she's a proper rich French woman. And then later on in the movie, when she dresses more like a tomboy, then she looks like a teenager, really. But that's also kind of by design. But the top billed actor is Alan Cuny. I'm going to pronounce that. I don't know exactly. He plays Mario, the weirdo old guy. He must have just been a bigger name at the time. I saw he's a Caesar Award winner for Best Supporting Actor. The Caesar Awards is the French Academy Awards.
Okay.
So maybe he's a respected actor, but if it's anything like the Oscars, just keep in mind some of the people who have won Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars. Cuba Gooding Jr., the star of Snow Dogs. It's not always the most prolific group of people. Jared Leto, the star of Suicide Squad. There's some not that great actors who maybe just turn in a really great performance or just have a great role and great script to deal with. Cuba Gooding Jr. is always the one I like to go to because I think he's one of the least talented Oscar winners I can think of because he's just but then again he's perfect in Jerry Maguire, but I think it's just the perfect role for him. But everything else, Radio and Snow Dogs, Boat Trip, the dude did nothing worth watching basically.
Is that what he won the Oscar for? Radio?
No, Jerry Maguire. No, He did not win it for Radio. He, as they would say in Tropic Thunder, made the mistake of going full retard in Radio. I think that's potentially the reason why he didn't win the Oscar for that one.
Yeah.
So, the movie opens with Emmanuelle getting dressed, getting ready. She lives in her home in Paris. There is nude artwork on the wall, which is something that this has in common with the other film. And she is traveling to visit her husband and stay with him. Her husband, Jean, is an older man, not super old, I think 10 years older than her. He's in his early 30s. He almost looks older, though. I think the mustache ages him. And he is a diplomat, an ambassador between France and Thailand, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
He's just a rich French guy hanging out in Thailand. He's got his Thai housekeepers and stuff, and he's, although you almost wouldn't know, aside from the first scene where she arrives in Thailand, that Bangkok is populated with Thai people because, all the social gatherings, it's all French people, obviously. Emmanuelle has her, pool gang that she hangs out with. They're all French. But Emmanuelle arrives in Bangkok, and we get kind of weird colonialist attitudes, almost, I guess I'd describe it. And it's funny because when we think of, poorly dated colonialist attitudes, we usually think of British, right? Because Britain had arguably the most successful colonial empire, but France was just as bad, just as strong, whatever word you want to use. Emmanuelle, she's freaked out by the locals. The locals are obsessed with her because her husband has shown photos of her to everyone, and we find out later these are, I guess, nude photographs.
Yeah.
So they have a weird relationship, and we see later on that it's actually more straightforward than how it's described. But before we see them together, we hear Jean describing his wife, and he says he loves her because she's the only woman he's ever met who loves sex as much as she is good at it or something. Mm-hmm. And he essentially says that they have an open relationship. He's not worried about her cheating on him when she's in Paris and he's in Thailand. He's also not worried about cheating on her, because we see that later. Again, he wants to paint himself as a completely unjealous husband. We see later he's actually an asshole. But
yeah.
Yeah, there's a scene where they're driving through Thailand where she sees a chicken being beheaded, and she freaks out. And this is relevant to my family, because my grandmother, who is from Illinois, but her parents were from Ireland, and she visited Ireland. She visited a couple of her cousins there once, and so she's staying in rural Ireland. This is probably the 50s. Ireland was not particularly modern back then. They've come a long way since the Good Friday Agreement. But she was staying with her cousins, and they're like, "Oh, what do you want for dinner? Would you be good with chicken?" And so they beheaded a chicken and just hung it up on the door, and so they let all the blood drain out. And my grandma did not end up eating anything that night. But I've got a little kind of a similar story. I mean, I can understand Emmanuelle being turned off by this, obviously. But this is the only real culture shock that we see in the movie. I almost think they could have developed upon this more, because Emmanuelle's deal when she's in Thailand is kind of like she doesn't feel at home, and but I think it's less about being in Thailand. It's more about the French women that are around her.
Yes.
Right? Because we see her at the pool gang. Every woman, all they want to talk about is sex. They all want to hear about her sexual exploits in Paris, which she doesn't deny having, but she denies cheating on her husband, and she says later that it's not cheating on him if I'm not hiding it from him.
It's always weird that they bring up the word cheating, but again, like, you're not cheating because it is an open relationship, right? So I was just a little confused by...
She doesn't view it as cheating, so she's never the one using that word. It's always the other people, the other women.
Who are actively cheating on their husbands.
Right. Who basically... or some of them, we don't even know much about these people. Some of them aren't married. One of them, I'm not sure she's an adult. The really young-looking one who...
With the sucker?
Yeah, with the sucker who starts masturbating in front of Emmanuelle at one point. I get the impression they're trying to say she's like... Maybe she's like 18, but 16. Like she's a very young person, definitely. And who knows how old the actress is? I'm assuming she's of age. Weirdo
Hopefully.
French Europeans, who knows? There is. I don't believe this film has any nudity, but there is a. I think it's Brigitte Bardot's first film, The Girl in the Bikini or something, was very scandalous because it basically objectifies a 17-year-old girl because that's how old she was.
Oh my God.
Oh, France. But yeah, no, I mean, I would describe this relationship between Emmanuelle and Jean as very French. Mm-hmm.
I guess so, yeah.
Very open about their sexuality. Everyone in this movie super open about their sexuality. Again, very French. And so we have the first sex scene, which you mentioned, Emmanuelle and Jean. It is spotted by, I think the guy's name is John, which is a little confusing. I think we only hear his name once. But he is one of the Thai people working there. I don't know exactly his position. He sees that, and then he invites a housekeeper over to watch it, and then he chases her around and has sex with her, and the whole scene was horribly confusing because it kind of felt like it was rape. It kind of didn't. I mean, it was like a playfulness, but it almost felt like it crossed a line and went over into rape.
Yeah,
that's
exactly
really
it.
sure.
That's exactly it.
It's just, I hated that scene.
Yeah.
There are essentially 3 scenes, maybe 4 scenes in this movie that really ride the line between rape and sex, and at least I think only one of them is really addressed, and that's the scene with Jean and what was her name, Alan, something like that.
Yeah.
Who's Emmanuelle's friend, and he has sex with her when he's looking for Emmanuelle, and it's very aggressive, it's very rough, and I'm going to go ahead and say that if any sex scene in this movie is unsimulated, it's that one, because it only lasts about 20 seconds, so that's pretty accurate to sex as I know it.
Yeah.
And when she talks to him later, she says that, like, I think he almost raped her or something. Like, so she implies that I guess she was into it, she wanted it, but he still kind of went over the top a little bit too.
Yeah, I think that is kind of the takeaway from that. You're right.
So Emmanuelle plays squash with Alan. They have sex afterwards. This is a scene where, I mean, it starts, for lack of a better term, I'll say innocent. I mean, we know what Alan is thinking the entire time, but she's like, oh, let me wipe down all this sweat from you. But really, she's just taking off her clothes. And then there's that. And then there's a social gathering where Marie-Ange, who invites herself over to Emmanuelle's house at one point, masturbates in front of her, and then that inspires Emmanuelle to talk about the first time she had sex with her husband, who was not her husband at the time. Or I think Marie-Ange says something like, oh, so you've only had sex with your husband or something. And then, oh no, she asks like, oh, have you had sex with anyone else in Paris? And then she says, well, not in Paris, but then she recounts the time she had sex with a stranger on an airplane. She joins the Mile High Club, which I actually kind of liked that scene. I thought it was filmed in a genuinely, like,
yeah, it was interesting
way.
And erotic.
And then I also like how, because she's like trying to keep quiet, he's trying to keep her quiet because they're on an airplane, overnight flight. And then I like how after they're more or less done having sex, then he picks her up and like carries her into the bathroom to continue. But when he picks her up, she's like, her clothes are like mostly off, and he's just carrying her through the airplane. At this point, everyone's awake and kind of looking. Like, I just thought that was kind of neat.
I can understand why so many people were into this movie. You know, I read this like interesting statistic that I think it was like Columbia got the distribution rights for this movie in North America, and they only got it after they discovered that the majority of European audiences were women.
Yes, that was something I wanted to mention as well, is that this movie is arguably, it's just a male fantasy to a certain extent. It's about a woman who will more or less have sex with anyone, man, woman, possible child with Marie Antoinette. Well, they don't really have sex. You know, it's sort of a male fantasy, but it's also like, there's something about the film too where it is sort of appealing to women, or maybe this was just a point in time where nothing like this was made for women. It might be that more than anything. But I know, for instance, this is based on a novel. Mm-hmm. It is... I don't remember the name of the author. I know she went by the pseudonym of Emmanuelle. I think she was a Thai-born author. She was a French author, though. But so the book is written by a woman. This is sort of, you know, maybe you could say the book was kind of the 50 Shades of Grey before 50 Shades of Grey kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Going back to the Red Shoe Diaries, I think a show like that was more of... I think it was less of a male fantasy and more a female fantasy. And
I get that sense, but I wonder, too, if that's potentially just the difference between softcore and hardcore pornography. If at this point, maybe hardcore pornography is, for the most part, marketed towards men, and maybe softcore is marketed towards women because it's a bit not as sexually explicit, and maybe it's a bit more about love and tenderness. I know that's kind of putting women and men in different stereotypes that, you know, I'm sure they don't fully comply to, but I don't know.
I do think you're right, though. I do think you're right. Emmanuelle reads like an erotic novel, which is, you know, what it's based off of. Here's a bit of a story. When I was a paper boy years ago, like 15 years ago, for like 5 months in the paper, when they were dropped off at my door to deliver early in the morning, I was also given a bundle of like these door hangers, and they were door hangers for like these Harlequin romance novels. Each of them had like a coupon on the back so that you could go to like Chapters or wherever and buy the newest novel, but they also came with like a little dark chocolate bar inside. And they were really marketing these towards women and the whole experience towards women.
Are you saying women can't control their senses when they're given chocolate? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Or after sex or masturbation, some women do like to have chocolate.
But maybe some men do, too.
That's exactly it, because I'd love some chocolate. Or like George Costanza, taking it back to Seinfeld. And I remember that episode.
Pastrami in bed. Yeah, not even after. During.
The greatest combination of all time.
Yeah, and pastrami, the most sensual of all the meats. of all the deli meats. I think that's the line.
This movie reminds me of these Harlequin things marketed towards women, and I do understand that, you know, Emmanuelle is kind of like a male fantasy, but as I'm watching it, I'm like, it's centered around a woman who is doing things for her own personal pleasure. So I also feel like it's got to be...
Yes and no, because the second half of the movie, the last act or whatever, is kind of... It's for her own personal pleasure, but it's for her own personal pleasure that Mario wants her to find. You know, there's a little bit of controlling thing, which doesn't necessarily make it a male fantasy, because I think some of the drama of the film is that she's being controlled by men, either Jean, who turns out is a lot more jealous than he had led us to believe, or by Mario, who's just this creepy old guy who everyone wants her to get with for some reason. So, and actually, I'm going to bring up something in the Black Emmanuelle movies. So, one of my favorite things in exploitation films, and by the way, Emmanuelle, I would say it's debatable if this is even an exploitation film. I think this is borderline art house, borderline sexploitation. It really rides that line. I don't usually see this described as a sexploitation movie. You see the Black Emmanuelle movies described as that because those are Italian hack filmmakers who are, you know, they're just... Yeah, they're exploitation films. There's a scene in Black Emmanuelle 2 where a man, I mean, you don't see it, but there's a man hangs like a 12-pound dumbbell from his erection or something. It's like, okay, that's classic exploitation stuff, right? You know, you don't have that in a serious drama film. But one of the Black Emmanuelle movies, I think it's Black Emmanuelle, White Emmanuelle, which it has several titles. That's one of the titles. So I love this in exploitation movies. I think it's mostly on accident. but when exploitation movies end up having something to say about people that are exploited, I think the classic example is Cannibal Holocaust. Cannibal Holocaust is by most means a reprehensible film, but the story really is about how these white guys are just exploiting natives in South America for not money so much as like their entertainment, and then it turns out to bite them in the ass because they get eaten by them. Cannibal Holocaust is an exploitation movie. I think it accidentally says something kind of profound about exploitation. I think Black Emmanuelle, White Emmanuelle is kind of the same thing, because there's like, I think this might be a theme running throughout the Laura Gemser Black Emmanuelle movies, but that the men are incredibly controlling of her, and all of her most satisfying relationships are with women who they kind of just want her for sex and pleasure, but they don't try to control her. And that's the difference between her and the men here. And that's kind of the case here with Emmanuelle, because the one Emmanuelle is really into is B, who is the French archaeologist who is part of the pool gang, but also someone that no one in the pool gang likes. And it turns out they don't like her because she's kind of just a normal person. She has a job. She does something with her life. And that's ultimately what Emmanuelle finds attractive about her. I think she says, like, all these other women, all my other friends just don't do anything with their life. And this is, again, sort of maybe where it appeals to women, or at least where it moves beyond porn into genuine drama. Emmanuelle wants something more than just what she has. Mm-hmm. Now, ultimately, when Mario enters the picture, what she ends up wanting is just more ways to feel satisfied with sex, but initially it's just more ways to be satisfied, not necessarily through sex. And so she hangs out with B. B invites her on her archaeological expedition, where, this is where I mentioned, she dresses like kind of a tomboy. She wears a little baseball cap. She looks like a 14-year-old child in these scenes. She reminded
me of like Ernest from the Ernest movie. You know?
yeah. She looks adorable in these scenes. These scenes are really charming. But eventually, they have sex, the two of them, and then afterwards, she's basically trying to tell B that she loves her. This is the first person I've said this to outside of my husband. But B ultimately wasn't really looking for that, and so she kind of gets her heart broken by B. And then following the B relationship, everyone, Alan, or is it Alan or Ariane?
Ariane, I believe.
Ariane, yeah. Alan Cooney is the actor who plays Mario, so maybe that's why I was confused. Ariane and Jean, and even Mario eventually try and get her just to forget about B. And to forget about B, we want you to get with Mario. Mario is an old man. How old would you say he is? I feel like they talk about him as if he's older than he actually looks.
He looks like he's in his 60s, maybe. Early
I would
60s.
Agree. I think Marie-Ange is initially the person that introduces her to Mario. I think they say something like, if a man that old still is able to have sex, you know he's really good at it, or something. Yeah. And it's like, come on, he's not like Keith Richards. Like, he's not that old.
Yeah.
So when she's with B, this is when we discover that Jean really is jealous, and he doesn't like that Emmanuelle is with other people, or maybe just that she's with another woman. We're not really sure, but this is when he goes and has sex with Ariane, with the sex that's borderline rape, and then he's leaving. He's going out of town. He's doing ambassador stuff, so he leaves her in the care of Mario, and Mario takes her out to dinner, and Mario's got all this like philosophical dialogue. Mario is the most French character in the movie.
Oh, absolutely.
But his I actually found him. I know this is where the movie takes a drastic tonal shift. Mario's whole thing is he's like being really philosophical, and he's kind of an asshole. Well, he's definitely an asshole, but he's doing all this like, monogamy should be banned, it should be outlawed, it's a thing of the past. This is where the movie really feels like, that one friend who and I'm not saying like you have this friend, but I know a lot of people do. I'm not sure I have this friend, but that one asshole who's always like, oh yeah, you need to try shrooms, man. You'll completely change your
friend.
Life.
Yeah.
Oh, you do have that friend. Okay.
Absolutely.
That is Mario, except Mario specifically with opium and untamed sex.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, so because Mario takes her to an opium den. Before he takes her to an opium den, this is after dinner, they go for a little carriage ride another Seinfeld connection. This is where Kramer in Central Park feeds the horse beefarini and it starts farting on Susan's parents, all that stuff.
Classic.
He stops the carriage, pulls over a random French dude and said, like, here, take her legs. And he ends up taking her panties off, and then Mario stops her. So it's like, this is like, he almost has this guy rape her. Mm-hmm. And I think this is like, I don't know if it's a test, or the whole thing is he wants her, I guess, to just submit to kind of...
I'm not sure if it's like submit to her urges, but it's almost like just submit to sex.
Yeah, that's the thing, because this guy is not... This random dude wandering around in the middle of the park at 11 p.m. is not her urge. Mm-hmm. It's never about what Emmanuelle wants in these scenes with Mario.
No.
And that's partially what makes them very uncomfortable. He takes her to an opium den. This is where we get the really philosophical dialogue. So he's saying that she needs to be able to find true pleasure, and she can only find that through lust, not love. But ironically, that she's going to find love through true pleasure. This kind of makes sense to me so far.
Yeah.
Not everything Mario says makes sense. Most probably doesn't, but... You know, he's his opium.
Yeah, because he's a crazy old French man on opium.
So, and then this scene in the opium den gets really weird. Mario just starts randomly talking about death, and then Emmanuelle gets a weird feeling she wants to leave. But then some of the Thai men in the opium den attack her, and I guess they rape her, but it's really weird because we kind of cut away from it quickly, and it's like the next day, and it's not acknowledged. And again, she's still hanging out with Mario.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so I mentioned I think there's like 4 borderline rape scenes. We have the 2 Thai household workers, which it's sex. It kind of looks like it's almost rape. It's also hard to tell because we don't know a damn thing about those characters. So that's one of them. I would say the carriage, the guy in the carriage who Mario invites over, that's almost rape. Jean and Ariane, that's 3. And so this is number 4. I think this is the last one. Right?
Yeah, and this is rape.
Yes, this is the most rape, but it's also like the way it cuts from it. It's almost like, was this her imagination? Was this like a weird opium trip or something? Because it's like, again, just that it's never acknowledged again. I think even the next day they're talking about things, and I think she talks about her imagination. So I'm just really not sure what that scene was about. So then Mario takes her to a Thai boxing match. And this is where you get martial arts in both films. We get the Thai boxes, which is like kickboxing. They've got boxing gloves on, but they also kick. There's 2 men fighting. It's understood that she's going to be the reward to the victor. Mm-hmm. Mario asks her, which of the 2 men does she prefer? She picks the one with better hair, which is fair. He's the one who ends up winning the fight. Yeah. And then afterwards, Mario makes her get down on all 4s, and he has the boxer have sex with her from behind. This one, while anonymous, not rape. This is the most on board Emmanuelle has been with Mario's weird sexual experimentation or whatever, you know? This is like she at this point understands what he's going on about. I'm not sure I do. But she at least understands it, and that's the important part.
This is when she's finally given over to lust. And she's letting lust dictate how she does things.
That's what I thought, but then the final scene with the 2 of them, with Emmanuelle and Mario, it looks like they're about to have sex, and then she's like, do you even want me? And he's like, no, I want a future Emmanuelle, an Emmanuelle you don't know yet. Mm-hmm. And like, I thought we just established that this is finally her. So I really, at the end of the day, I really feel like this movie didn't have much resolution. But Emmanuelle never has sex with Mario. She might, seconds after the end of the movie, but she is, I guess, resolved to become a different woman through her sexuality, or explore her sexuality maybe in a different way. Even though she's kind of already been exploring it the entire movie, it's a little uneven. I mean, this is a coming of age movie, and it's felt both ways, really. Yeah, exactly. Because she's a young woman. That's what I really like. I really like the stuff about the B relationship, because that's, B is an older woman. Every character in this movie except for Marie-Ange is older than Emmanuelle. But the heartbreak she has with B, because that's when you really realize Emmanuelle is very immature. Mm-hmm. And B isn't, and they didn't view the relationship on the same terms. And so I like that stuff. I think that's the strongest stuff in the movie. But, we're here at the end of the movie. Jim, what did you think about Emmanuelle?
First time seeing it, I'd always heard about it. Of course, I wanted to delve into it because of Rochelle. Yeah, it's fine. I don't really... it was just weird. I don't know if I found it weird because of all the sex, or I found it weird because of its Frenchness, or Mario's philosophizing. It was an interesting movie. It's a very different kind of film. I can understand why this did so well in a place like France and why this has kind of made its way into pop culture. I did like the Emmanuelle and B stuff the most. That was...
for sure.
That was like the best part. And I mean, all the stuff in Thailand was...
That was a charming relationship because we saw them do stuff other than sex, too. We saw them... They're going for their little boat ride in the Bangkok canals, the place where Sheriff J.W. Pepper vacationed. All that
I was about to say, yeah.
I was going to say, I know that's my biggest complaint of The Man with the Golden Gun, because does this look like a place that Sheriff J.W. Pepper would ever visit with his wife? No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
That man has not left the American South. I feel like that's a horrific character inconsistency. That's not the Sheriff J.W. Pepper that I know from Live and Let Die.
I still love in that movie where he gets pickpocketed by a little elephant.
A little elephant, that's a weird way to describe Knick-Knack.
Got him. Oh, take that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have many thoughts on Emmanuelle, to be honest.
Well, we had a lot of thoughts. We went over them before we went over the movie, because I think this raises interesting questions about what is art, what is porn. We talked about that. Those are most of my thoughts about the movie. I think overall, I think as a movie, as a drama, it's far from perfect. Mm-hmm. I think the B stuff is definitely the best.
Yes.
I do like... I mean, I don't like the character of Jean, obviously. He's an asshole, and he's French, so double asshole. But I do like that how we're introduced to him. He's this, for lack of a better term, I'll use the phrase like perfect husband, maybe perfect French husband, not controlling, willing to let his wife do whatever she wants sexually, but then when she does that, he's bothered by it. But then it also becomes inconsistent, because then he wants her with Mario.
Mm-hmm.
And Mario ultimately wants her exploring her sexualities in, again, different but kind of the same ways that she's been doing the entire movie. I guess ultimately the big thing is they're trying to get Emmanuelle, Mario in particular, is trying to get Emmanuelle to have sex without love, and maybe the love comes through the sex. And where she had sex with B because she was genuinely interested in her. But here, if you have sex with this random Thai boxer, maybe you'll be more fulfilled.
Yeah,
or
maybe
if you have
it's
sex
about
with this weirdo in the park at 11 p.m.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Is it about learning to love through sex, or learning to love sex versus learning to have sex with someone you love?
And that's the thing. I'm not French. I don't understand this stuff. The French are far more sexual people than us North Americans, I guess. I.e., they're perverts in many cases.
I knew that was coming.
But then again, you're the anime fan, so who's the bigger pervert?
Okay,
but,
okay, sir.
Yeah, so the movie is very French. I think you said that earlier, and that's, I don't know if that makes it better or worse. I think it makes it more interesting.
I think it makes it classier. I think it makes it classier.
Yes, I agree with that, and I think some of that is because we associate foreign films with classiness, which is not the case with our second foreign film today. But just like general subtitles, okay, it's a classy film, but really, they make just as much smut over there in France and Italy as they do here. I mean, House by the Cemetery, the Italian movie that we've covered, is about the least classy movie I've ever seen. But there's a little something special about the subtitles. The subtitles, it plays a psychological trick with you. You're reading, so you think it's making you smarter.
Or even the French language is such a beautiful
language
that too. To listen to.
I have mixed feelings about the French language. I know we've talked about this a little bit with the pronunciation, how it feels like, just whatever the last 4 or 5 letters of a word, don't worry about them because it's going to be pronounced the same regardless of how the last 4 letters are. I don't really like the French language, but that's just me. I mean, it sounds good in these...
Well, the French language is better than the Quebecer language, Quebecer French.
That's probably true, but listen, give me a good heavy Glaswegian slang slang accent, that to me is like the sexiest thing in the world. But that's me. I'm a weirdo. Okay, I like me some. Weird,
I kind of agree with
hard
you,
to
I'm
understand
honest.
Northern English and Scottish accents. I think they can be incredibly sexy and awesome. So yeah, I think we're kind of in the same boat with Emmanuelle. It's an okay movie. There's a time and a place for this movie. It's more of a curiosity than it is an entertaining film, I think. And it's a curiosity for a number of reasons. That this like weirdo softcore pornographic thing became a big international hit, and obviously it's from France makes it all the more likely for it to have been successful in the United States, but they still pulled it off. And then, Sylvia Kristel, we haven't said this, I think she is a good actress, at least in this movie. I think she gives a very good performance. Everything with her and B is very believable. The heartbreak she feels, and even the scenes where she's hanging around like looking like Ernest, like those are very charming, and I think she gives a really good performance. And I'm going to say she's the best part of this movie, and that's kind of surprising to me because I've seen this movie before, and so the big reason why overall I like the Black Emmanuelle movies more than the Emmanuelle movies. I love the weirdo Italian exploitation stuff, and they are that. But I also do find the actress Laura Gemser, who plays Black Emmanuelle, who, spoilers, isn't black. She's like, I think she might be Thai. She's like Asian of some sort. I find her just much more attractive than Sylvia Kristel. Not that Sylvia Kristel is by any means unattractive, but I still stand by that. I think Laura Gemser is an absolute beauty, and Sylvia Kristel, she's attractive, but no, she's, again, I don't think Laura Gemser is a bad actress from what I've seen her in, but Sylvia Kristel is very good here. I don't think I've seen her in anything outside of the Emmanuelle movies. I know she did some stuff. I want to say she made a movie in the early 80s where she was like a teacher who had sex with like her 14-year-old student or something. So maybe those were kind of the roles she got.
Oh, no.
At least in American films. But I think she was probably a very talented woman who, because Emmanuelle was such a big hit, kind of led her to being typecast. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So speaking of typecast, you want to talk about people who vaguely look like Bruce Lee?
Yeah, or, speaking of well, actually, never mind. I can't make a segue. Yeah, let's talk about people who vaguely look like Bruce Lee. Like Bruce Lee.
I already made the segue. You don't need to make the second one.
Well, I was going to say something about...
Segues are my thing, damn it.
You're right,
I
sorry.
work hard at these.
I'm sorry. So, as we mentioned earlier, this next movie has many different titles. Superdragon versus Superman.
It's like choose your own adventure. Like, what do you want the movie to be titled? Who cares? It's whatever you want it to be.
So, I want it to be Superdragon versus Superman.
I want Bruce Lee versus Superman because that sounds like the dumbest title because it's neither Bruce Lee nor Superman.
I know. Well, okay, I'm going to give a very brief synopsis of this movie.
But I'm just thinking, like, in the title of the episode, we'll probably call it Superdragon versus Superman because that's the IMDb title. But I just want to say Bruce Lee versus Superman because it sounds funny.
So, stars Bruce Lee, who I was not aware of any kind of bruceploitation. I was barely aware of the exploitation genre. I knew of it. But when I met you and we talked about doing this podcast, you opened my eyes to a whole new world. And you...
Just to clarify, it's not when you met me. It's not like the first time you met me I was talking about you really need to see the movie Pieces. This came up years later. We had known each other for a while.
Yeah. When we watched Game of Death, that is when I learned about bruceploitation, right. I'm sure. And that blew my mind. And I have been kind of interested in it, but I haven't been watching any because I'm saving them for this podcast. I want...
But there's a lot on Tubi. You can, because we have so many movies on our list now. You can watch some if you want. I would recommend, again, the only other one I've seen was The Clones of Bruce Lee, which I think is one of the more famous ones, partially because it has the big four, partially because the title is just funny. But I enjoyed that movie quite a bit. I thought that was better than this movie. Not that I didn't enjoy this movie, but that was...
This movie's enjoyable because it's total shit and confusing. It's like a fever dream. If a fever dream was a movie, it could be something like this.
Well, you say fever dream. Is this a DCEU film? Because in some ways, I would describe Suicide Squad as a fever dream.
Well, it does have Superman in it.
Yeah, I think we need to lead off with that, is that the title... The Superman part of the title
Yeah, there's no Superman.
Well, there's no Superman, but at the same time, the title is somewhat literal because
Yeah.
maybe Superman isn't in it, but Green Hornet is. And now, I did not expect that going into this. This is one of the, so far, relatively rare films for this podcast that I hadn't seen before. But obviously Bruce Lee was Kato.
Yes.
So I think we could maybe call... I've seen this film described as Kato-sploitation, which might be a genre of one. I'm not sure. So he's Kato on the Green Hornet.
Yeah.
This involves the Green Hornet, which is kind of a fun little, like, Bruce Lee was in this, and we're doing this thing, but obviously it's not licensed by DC Comics, obviously, or whatever television network the Green Hornet was on.
Yeah.
I think that's safe to say.
Yeah.
But I think that's
so.
what kind of makes it, and obviously, because we get spoilers, we get a Superman that looks nothing like Superman. He kind of looks like Lionel Richie. Yeah, I thought it was kind of neat that they were trying to make their own kind of superhero movie. I didn't think it was going to be that, because the title, Superman, I thought it would just be like some really strong guy or something,
Yeah.
And then Superdragon is, it's like a superhero. And Bruce Lee's the dragon, whatever, I don't know. I didn't expect the Green Hornet. I did not. There, you see, I think, I could be wrong, but I think you see the DC Comics logo at one point. The poster above the bad guy's house that has, like, the naked woman on it? There's, like, the letters DC, and I think that's, like, a DC Comics thing.
Is that the bad guy's place?
I thought, maybe it's not the bad guys, but somebody's place.
Well, that poster, do you know what that poster is?
No. Did DC Comics release centerfolds at one time? What was I missing?
That poster had, like, a woman with her underwear falling off, right?
Oh, no, that was something different. I think there's more than one, because there was a poster with... I thought there was something with underwear falling off that was like kind of like the copper tone, but like a more
sexual...
exactly.
That's what I was going to say.
I'm talking about something different. I am talking about something
Oh
different, because there's the copper tone lady, which is a pinup version of the copper tone thing, because that was copper tone girl was Jodie Foster back in the day.
Really?
Yeah, she was like a young girl at the time. Like I think it's before Taxi Driver, so she's probably like 12 or something. So copper tone girl went on to be famous, but there is above someone's head, when they seated at a desk, I thought it's the bad guy or one of the kidnappers or something, there is like a naked woman.
Oh,
she's lying down on her front. You don't really see nudity, not explicit, but there is like a DC thing, and I think it's the DC Comics logo, but I'm not really sure. But I just want to bring this up. Obviously, this isn't licensed at all by DC Comics, but keep in mind, this is also the 1970s. Comic books were not a $1 trillion industry back then. They're not making blockbuster films every year, so it's like maybe it was licensed. I don't know. But this actually came out before the Christopher Reeve Superman. This is the first DC Comics superhero film, to my knowledge, unless there's another Kato-sploitation movie out there.
Well, so the title that I would say most matches this movie is Bruce Lee Against Supermen. And because you have like three dudes who are very powerful, and Bruce Lee has a hard time fighting, but then the only issue is
but two of them end
titles.
up fighting against the main bad guy later, so it's like I think there really is ultimately one that's greater than the others.
Okay,
who, by the way, doesn't do anything.
No.
He
not
does
even
have
the greatest character introduction ever, though.
Yeah, no, he's awesome, but he's like, they introduce him, they hire him, I guess, to take out the Green Hornet or something, and
which you only see him, the Green Hornet, twice in this movie.
Yeah, the beginning and the end. I was confused by this. The ending of the movie confused me. I don't want to say all Asians look alike or anything, but so the opening scene we see the Green Hornet, and at the end of the movie we see the Green Hornet. There's two Green Hornets. One's a white guy, one's an Asian guy. Yeah. I thought the Asian guy might be Bruce Lee. He kind of looked like him. Which wouldn't make any sense. It would have required a costume change right after a fight scene. It doesn't make any sense.
But it is him in the end.
Is it? Okay, so it is, okay, so that's what I thought, but it doesn't make sense, but it wouldn't make sense the other way either, because there's the scene where after the scientist is kidnapped, the scientist's daughter says to Bruce Lee, like, what are we going to do? And Bruce Lee's like, nothing, we're going to wait for the Green Hornet.
Yeah.
But, like, he is the Green Hornet then. What's he talking about?
No, he's Kato. So this is okay.
Oh, he's Kato. The white guy is the Green Hornet.
Yeah, but this is
Okay.
what's even more confusing, because at the very beginning of
The Green Hornet doesn't do anything.
Well, exactly. The Green Hornet doesn't exist for 99.9% of the movie. But at the very beginning of the movie, like, it just jumps into it with action, with like a car chase, a cop chasing like a car full of thugs who chuck a bag of money out the window.
This was the biggest laugh of the movie to me when it cuts to like tourists like opening a Pan Am bag,
Exactly,
and then the
and they're like,
dub
"Oh, it's
line is
money."
just money, and it's
but-
like that line made me laugh. So he's just like money.
Yeah, but then what's even better is Bruce Lee is there dressed as Kato, and he's like, "That money isn't yours. Come on, I'm taking you to I'm taking you to the police." And they're like, "What?" And he's like, "Go." And it's like, what the fuck is going on? So not only do you have the Green Hornet in like a funny looking costume, and Kato in like a Green Hornet costume, but then you also have Kato in his Kato costume.
Yeah, Kato's in his
show.
Kato costume in the which is the all black with the black like Lone Ranger mask kind of thing covering the eyes, and then later on he's wearing a Green Hornet costume.
Yeah, well, and the opening credits of the movie has the Green Hornet symbol in it, right?
I don't know anything about comic books. I don't know.
I don't know
if
anything about the Green Hornet other than
I don't know if the Green
TV
Hornet
show.
symbol ever looked like that. That's probably just their own version of it. Maybe it did look like that. I don't know.
Yeah, do you think like there was something lost in translation for this movie? Because there must have been. Like, there were a lot of things lost in translation.
Well, I want to say, and I'm speaking as someone who grew up on the English dubs of the American Godzilla films. This is some of the worst dubbing I've ever witnessed in a film. It's so bad, but that's
fantastic.
But that's obviously why one of the points of interest. I mean, it's what makes the movie so much more entertaining. I wouldn't want to see this kind of film in a subtitle. Like, again, going back to like when would you rather see subtitle? When would you rather see dub? For the most part, a lot of people would say subtitle's always going to be the more accurate version. But like, to me, it kind of depends on the genre. Like, if it's a movie I'm not taking seriously, if it's just a goofy kung fu Kato-sploitation movie, I welcome goofy dubbing because I'm already kind of laughing at some of the stuff, and then like, okay, I get a few more laughs out of the dubbing. Like, it's perfect.
Yeah, this movie had me kind of laughing at it throughout the whole thing, and my girlfriend, she's just left, but she was watching it with me too, and she goes, "What the fuck is this?"
Yeah,
She
my
goes, "This is a terrible movie."
mom caught a bit of this movie with me, and she couldn't believe it. My dad caught a little bit at the end too. So this movie goes off the rails really when we get those like clown characters, mimes, whatever they are.
Yeah,
I actually
the
hated
mime
all.
monkeys.
I hate. Don't call them that because they're black. I think one of them's black, but
I think they're Indian, aren't they?
I don't
what
know.
they
Well,
look like.
it's confusing because we get Taiwanese people in Arab face at one point. So the races
that's
are
the
very
best.
confusing.
That's my favorite.
It's never really clear. We also get an Asian Josh Gad. That was one of my favorite characters. The kidnapper with the sideburns. He looks just like Josh Gad if he were like 50% Asian or something like that.
Yeah.
I want to say the main kidnapper. Josh Gad's kind of the second kidnapper. The main character reminded me of some like American actor too, but I can't think of who it was. But I got a lot of entertainment out of just like what random American celebrity this actor kind of looks like or something, you know?
Yeah. Well, I guess just to briefly explain what this movie's about, because there really is not much of a plot.
There's more of a plot than I was expecting it to. The plot is pretty clear. I mean, the movie's not really clear because I don't really know what those clowns are, but the plot was pretty clear enough.
Well, I think the doctor's name is Dr. Ting, but you see his name written down as Dr. T.
Yeah, in the newspaper it just says Dr. T, which makes you think like
wow,
Mr. T went to college for 8 years or something.
Yeah, let's call him Dr.
I pity
T.
the fool who doesn't successfully defend his graduate thesis.
So Dr. T has a daughter named Alice, and Dr. T has invented this way to make food out of petroleum.
Oh, I knew it was just like, they describe it as like a way to potentially end world hunger, which is weird because we're running out of petroleum a lot quicker.
Exactly,
than we're running out of
but
food.
you gotta remember,
maybe
this is back like mid-70s.
Yeah, this late 70s there was a gas shortage, so this might
I think mid-70s too, so maybe this movie was already out of date. Yeah, so this Dr. T, he goes to the Middle East, or he goes to talk to Arabs, I guess, so maybe like the UAE, maybe. And they're all
Taiwanese Arabs, yeah, this was great.
And they're like walking out of like a temple, like clearly like a Taiwanese or Chinese temple.
So this movie is a Hong Kong Taiwanese production. I was trying to figure out where it was shot, because they drive on the right side of the road, which Hong Kong does not. They drive on the left.
Oh, yeah.
Does Taiwan drive on the right? Because my dad thought that maybe they drive on the left as well, but I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm assuming this movie was probably shot in Taiwan, mostly.
Well, here, hold on. I'm going to look it up really quick.
Kato, when Bruce Lee goes on a date with Dr. Ting's daughter, they go to, like, this big Buddha statue, and I was looking up, like, Buddha statues in Hong Kong. Like, there's giant Buddha statues everywhere. But yeah. I think I found one in Taiwan that reminded me of this, because I think a lot of Buddha statues, I think, have the right hand up, and I don't think this one did, and it looked like there was one in Taiwan that resembled this. So I would guess it was shot in Taiwan, but I don't really know.
I just looked it up, and in Taiwan, they drive on the right side of the road.
Okay, so this is probably shot in Taiwan then. Yeah. Unless Hong Kong would have been different back then, but I don't think so. That's such a massive change, and if they didn't change when they officially became part of China in, like, the 90s, then if you don't change then, when are you going to change, So
yeah. Well, anyways, we learned that Dr. T has some kind of sickness where he needs to take pills for it, but that doesn't come into effect right now.
Well, we learn in a very funny way, because he's hanging out with the Arabs, and then he just, like, falls down. I thought he was shot or something.
Yeah,
he's just
he convulses and then falls down.
But they're setting up the medicine, which comes back. It's a good setup and a payoff, I guess.
I guess. Now, already, this early on in the movie, I'm already confused, kind of, about who's who and what's what. Like, some bad guy is targeting Dr. T because he wants the formula for creating food from petroleum.
Right.
I don't know who the bad guy is. I don't know what his name is. He's some, like, white dude.
He's like a Lex Luthor type. He's like a supervillain type, I guess,
Yeah, but he's like a ginger or something. And then under him, he has, like, a bunch of goons and, like, a head goon.
Including Josh Gad.
Yeah. And these guys are instructed to kidnap Dr. T, because I guess he's returned from meeting Arabs.
The United Taiwanese Emirates.
Yeah. That's great, yeah. So they kidnap the doctor, and they also kidnap the daughter because she sees them. And Bruce Lee and his buddy, they're rolling up to Alice's place, and they're like, "Oh my God, isn't that Alice in the car?" So they follow Alice and her father.
To stop you again, we can get back to the exciting chase scene, which goes on for 25 minutes.
I know.
First of all, I enjoyed the fight scenes in this movie, but the chase scenes are awful and they're way too long. But
there's a lot of chase scenes.
Yes,
I think
but I want to talk about Bruce Lee's buddy. We first meet him. He is shirtless, fighting against other. I don't know if these are like Green Hornet affiliates. I know, again, my lack of comic book knowledge. There are multiple Green Lanterns. Is that true of Green Hornet?
I don't think so.
Okay, but he's fighting all these, like, kung fu buddies, and he's shirtless.
The shit kicked out of him.
He's doing well until Bruce Lee enters, and Bruce Lee just arrived. They called him in, whoever they is, to protect Dr. Ting.
Mm-hmm.
This fight scene is kind of bad because Bruce Lee's buddy doesn't seem that great. He seems a lot slower in his martial arts than Bruce Lee. By the way, very good in the martial arts scenes that we see him in, the fight scenes. He's excellent. His buddy, not as much. His buddy also, I'm not going to say, listen, he's in a lot better shape than I am or ever will be in, but this is probably the closest to a dad bod I've ever seen in a martial arts film, other than maybe Franco Nero in Enter the Ninja. I mean, he does not... Because we see Bruce Lee shirtless plenty of times, and he's pretty ripped. He's in Bruce Lee kind of shape, and his buddy really isn't.
His buddy's in Gay Lee butter shape,
What does that mean?
Gay Lee's a butter company. They've just been eating too much butter. That's it.
Is that a butter company? Of all the butter
Gay
companies,
Lee.
Land O'Lakes, Irish... I was going to say Irish Spring. What's the big Irish butter? Kerrygold, I think. Yeah, it's not Irish Spring. That's a soap company. You don't want to mix those two up. Although, going back to Seinfeld, Kramer discovers that butter is an excellent substitute for shaving cream. When he starts shaving in the shower, he uses butter. The butter shave episode instead.
Yeah, and then he also accidentally cooks himself in the sun. You're right. Like, his buddy's not in perfect shape, but he's in good enough shape. Like, he's believable. You know what I mean?
I guess. I think more so than the shape thing, his martial arts scene, especially this like training scene, he does not look nearly as awesome as Bruce Lee.
Yeah, and actually, continuing on with the martial arts in this, it seemed to me like it was pretty slow.
Well, specifically with the Land O'Lakes guy. Yeah.
Well, with both of them, to be honest.
Okay.
Less so with Bruce Lee, but there were definitely scenes where, like...
Okay.
It just moved a little slower, and you could tell things that were kind of choreographed.
And also Superman, when we finally meet Superman, we don't meet him until halfway in the movie at least, but his martial arts is less combat and more just jumping around. Like, he does a lot of jumping, a lot of, like, trampoline stuff or wires. It's mostly shot outdoors, so I would guess trampoline.
Well, here, I'm going to just describe the rest of the movie in, like, 2 sentences. Because what happens is Dr. T and Alice get kidnapped and then escape and then kidnapped again several times. And Bruce Lee and his buddies
she doesn't get kidnapped a second time, though.
And, yeah, Bruce Lee keeps coming to their rescue. Eventually, Bruce Lee has to fight the Superman, which is like a Chinese dude in a white cape.
It's Lionel Richie.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. That fight really goes nowhere. Bruce Lee just kind of runs away and saves the Doctor again when the Green Hornet shows up at the end. Like, the movie, like, the whole plot is Doctor discovers cure for world hunger and gets captured and escapes and gets captured and then
needs
saved.
His pills.
Yeah, he needs his pills, he needs his medication. That's the whole plot.
Well, that is the plot, but we're missing some of the, and I want to talk about how, obviously this is a bruceploitation film, but this movie has some elements of exploitation films that you will not see in a Bruce Lee film, i.e. skinny dipping daughter.
Yeah.
Which actually wasn't as... they didn't make it as, like, titillating as they could have. They didn't go over the top with it. They just have the kidnapper spying on her in binoculars, and then Josh Gad is trying to get his attention. But then we get an amazing cat fight, because is it Bruce Lee is having sex with someone?
Yes. So Bruce Lee is just banging some random chick.
Yeah, but
after he'd already been kind of like been with Alice, and then Alice comes over.
Yeah, and then they fight, and the cat fight it gets taken into the bathtub, of course, and it's like this is so exploitation cinema. I love it. It was so stupid.
I was sitting there. Literally, I said out loud, I said, "What the fuck is this?" Like, it just
Catfight, another Seinfeld connection. Raquel Welch, Catfight.
Which, by the way, something we forgot to mention in Emmanuelle. My favorite scene in Emmanuelle for what the fuck was when the woman is puffing away on a cig out of her vagina. That's pretty awesome.
I actually, you know what? I don't think that was in the edit of the movie I had, but I've seen that before, and I know that's like a notorious scene, so that's why I didn't mention it. I think it's possible you saw a hardcore cut of the film, because I do remember hearing about that scene. I don't know if I've ever seen it, I guess, but I don't...
I heard it was in French cinemas, but it was taken out for American release.
I would have remembered that scene, right? I mean...
Yeah. It's a crazy scene. And also, the rape scene in mine lasted longer than it did yours, so I probably watched it different.
Oh, with the opium den rape scene, I guess.
Yeah. The opium den rape scene.
Okay, that makes sense. So I saw it's still X-rated, but closer to an R-rated version, I guess.
This movie has so many great scenes, like that cat fight. One of my favorite bits in this movie is with the rickshaw, when Alice is taking the medication to the bad guys, so that
I like that they lower him on a pulley and everything.
Yeah. Well, I love that she takes a rickshaw to get there to give like Bruce Lee a cover for being there. But then when the car speeds away, it like shows footage of him sped up, so it looks like he's like a superhuman running. With her.
Which, by the way, the Christopher Reeve Superman does a pretty similar thing when it's not Christopher Reeve, it's when he's a teenager, but when he outruns a train, it's a similar, very fake-looking sped-up effect.
After they get to the, I guess, quote-unquote lair where they're keeping Dr. T, and Alice is there, she's like struggling to try to get away from them. Next thing you know, all you see is like a rickshaw enter at the left of the screen.
Oh, and he's like screaming as he charges.
Yeah, and he's screaming, and he's like just running at people with a fucking rickshaw.
Yeah, that was fun. Also, I wanted to point out that when he's following her after she's being taken with the medicine to Dr. Ting, she's essentially being kidnapped, but she's going voluntarily.
Yeah.
She is like applying makeup and then throws it out the window, like so that he knows to keep following that direction. Except usually when you have a scene like that, it's like a small like thing that the bad guys wouldn't notice you drop, and in this case, it's like the size of a laptop, whatever she throws out. Like, it was huge, whatever it was.
She chucks, like, lipstick, something else, in, like, a compact mirror.
Yeah, it was the compact mirror was barely compact. It was like a full-on, like, household mirror.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's just so many great scenes in this movie.
Can we talk about some of the bad scenes? I mentioned, like, the clown mime guys. This is during the rickshaw scene. This is when he's running away with Dr. Ting. These, like, is it 3 or 4? I think it's 4 guys. They stop him, and they don't really fight him at first. They kind of just jump around and make noises, which I guess means they're not mimes. Yeah. But it's just a really weird scene. It goes on for too long. Eventually, they have ropes, and they're, like, swinging ropes at him and tying him up, and that was kind of fun. When it actually got to the fighting of him and those guys, it was fun, but most of the scene wasn't fighting. Most of the scene was just them jumping around and doing nonsense.
Yeah, like, I thought it was really interesting how the movie used reversing the footage.
Oh, when Superman jumps out of the water, that was awesome.
Yeah, or like when the mime clown people, when they're jumping into the trees, it's clearly reversed, right? But like it's still, like, it's kind of goofy, but it's kind of neat. I think the worst part about that scene, other than the jumping around and making noise, was when they're throwing, like, those sword disc things at Bruce Lee, but they're just, like, tossing them.
But he kept ducking and he'd miss them, but then they would catch them. Yeah. But the whole point was that they were sharp and they could hurt him, right? But they're just catching them just fine. So, like, they didn't really seem threatening.
No. The greatest introduction of a character I've seen in a long time, though, is Superman. When he's doing, like, Chinese calligraphy, but he's, like, spinning around the room and
he's writing around. He's writing with kung fu, essentially.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Which was really cool. I agree with that. That looked awesome.
Probably my favorite fight scene was the one with Bruce Lee and Superman on the boat.
The second one? Oh, on the boat. That's the first one. Okay.
Yeah, the first one. I like that one a lot. The second one was also really good.
Well, my favorite thing about the first fight scene between those two is when he knocks Superman into the water and Superman jumps out of the water onto a cliff. Again, clearly reversed, but I'm going to say that they did that really well because the actor, stuntman, whoever, Superman must have, when he landed in the water, he made it look like he was jumping because it looked good.
Yeah, it looked really good.
Which means that jump probably hurt like hell because he probably wasn't bracing himself the way you normally would making a jump like that.
Ugh. Well, actually, one of the worst scenes in the movie was when Bruce Lee is almost killed by the sniper that the bad guys hire.
Okay.
He runs up to the top of, like, this building to find the sniper, but the sniper's already down on the street. So he rappels down the building, which is kind of neat. Yeah. But then it leads to a foot chase for about 10 minutes.
Yes, way too long. Again, the movie has, like, 2 chase scenes. They both go on way too long. There's a car chase that goes on for way too long.
Yeah.
But the foot chase, way too long. I agree. I mean, both chase scenes.
The foot chase scene, the only interesting thing about these chase scenes is getting to see what, I guess, Taiwan looked like back in the mid-70s. Like, there's a really cool shot where the sniper's running across.
The foot chase scene, they run through, like, a downtown area, some area that looked really neat.
And there's a huge Pepsi sign. Did you see that?
I saw a huge Coca-Cola sign at one point. I don't know if it was this scene.
There's a Pepsi sign.
Yeah, no, it's like the modern-day DC movie, the way 7-Eleven is all over Man of Steel. The way Coke and Pepsi are all over this movie.
It's a shame because, like, these chase scenes don't lead to a good enough payoff for the amount of time that you're investing in this fucking stupid scene.
I would agree with that, although I would say that the fight scene when they cut off the car kidnapping Dr. Ting, that is a fun fight scene, but with the amount of time devoted to a not very exciting chase scene, it's probably still an underwhelming payoff. I agree.
Yeah, I'm not even really sure what else to talk about because there's so many weird things. I'm trying to look at my notes as well.
Can we talk about Superman's henchmen and like why they end up turning against him? Because that was kind of weird. That was weird. I think there was like a line about how he wasn't being paid, and that's why his guys turned against him or something.
One of the bad guys is escaping their hideout or whatever with Alice over his shoulder, and these 2 Superman henchmen, who are also like super tough and powerful, they block his way. So when the guy says, "Hey, move the hell out of my way," they go, "No, we don't like how you're treating that woman."
Yeah.
And then at first it seems kind of like a moral thing. And you're like, oh, wow, they actually have good
Oh yeah,
morals.
because is this where Josh Gad kind of stops a rape scene from happening? Is this that scene?
Oh, I don't.
Because there's
it is.
the white guy, the white guy who kind of looks like John Madden is on top of like a young John Madden, like
Yeah.
a Oakland Raiders.
I think it is, 'cause he
chain
grabs her and
smoking
runs
on the
out,
sideline.
right?
Yeah, and Josh Gad stops him, but then Josh Gad ends up just running off with her. I think, right?
Yeah, so at first it seems like they're standing up for their morals, but then another guy comes out and goes, "Why don't you move? We're paying you to help us." And they're like, "Paying who? Us?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're paying you because we're not getting paid." Then there's like an immediate cut to the two Superman henchmen talking to Superman. They're like, "Are you getting paid for this?" And he's like, "Yes." And they're like, "You're a piece of shit."
If this is accurate, and because I guess I remember that second exchange where Superman says he's getting paid, but they're not. I don't remember the first exchange where the guy thought he was paying them. It's just to establish they're okay doing this mission when they're not getting paid, but as soon as they hear they were supposed to get paid, then they're like, "Wait a second, I don't like this."
And then that's when they turn against Superman. You have them like actively helping Bruce Lee to take down Superman. That fight against Superman, though, pretty cool.
There's some nunchucks.
Yeah, that's
Which
awesome.
that's a very nunchucks. It's a very Bruce Lee thing, I believe, because it's ninchaku is the word. It's a Japanese word, and I believe nunchucks weren't really used in Chinese martial arts until Bruce Lee. So I think like a lot of movies. This is what I got from our friends at the Clones Cast, who I reached out to. This is a podcast about bruceploitation. I've only listened to the first couple episodes. I like listening to podcasts from the beginning. I ought to get back to it. They seem like really nice guys when I've reached out to them with some questions about this, because initially we selected a different Bruce Lee film, but it was one that we couldn't find anywhere, and I asked them like what the availability is, and they were trying to help us out with that, but eventually I'm just like, let's just do a different Bruce Lee film, and let's do Bruce Lee versus Superman, because it's a funny title. But I know they said this in one of their episodes that like Bruce Lee was really, especially in China, was known for nunchucks because that was not a common thing in Chinese martial arts. So when they have that in a bruceploitation movie, it's a definite nod, I guess, to Bruce Lee, more so than some of the other fighting styles, I guess.
Oh, gotcha. The nunchuck scene was pretty cool, but the scene became even cooler when Superman like showed his spiked greaves.
Oh yeah, he's got like
And
brass knuckle bracelet kind of things.
yeah, and he starts just kind of like kicking the shit out of Bruce Lee, and he's like stabbing him while he's doing it.
Oh yeah,
which is really
Bruce Lee gets beat up. There's like blood. There's a lot
Yeah.
bloodier than you would. Again, going back to like, there's certain things that are far more exploitation movie than they are Bruce Lee cinema, and that's a good example of like how kind of bloody that fight gets. Not that there's no blood in Bruce Lee movies.
Yeah. One of the most confusing scenes in the movie is in the last 2.5 minutes. So I knew that the movie was about an hour and a half long. I think it's like an hour 35. I was like keeping track of the time, and I was like, this movie's got to be over soon. And it looked like it was nowhere close to ending. And you get the bad guys who have kidnapped the doctor again. They're crossing into the quote-unquote Northern Territory. And when they get there, they're going to be free as a bird, I guess. And they pull through this like police checkpoint,
which I think could be again, going back to, we think this movie is shot in Taiwan, but that could be they're crossing over from Hong Kong into mainland China. It could be that I think they're implying that.
Okay, they get through this checkpoint, and then the driver pulls the car over, and it's this woman who I think we saw briefly earlier in the movie. And she turns and points a gun at the
Yeah, I did not remember
main
who
bad
this
guy.
woman was. I think you're right. I think we saw her earlier, but I don't remember
very
who the hell
briefly.
she was.
But yeah, she just like turns around, points a gun at this bad guy. She's like, "Hey, I'm working with the police. We've got you."
Yeah.
And then
I
as
don't
she's
know who
doing
you
that,
are, lady.
yeah. And then as she's doing that, some taxis pull up, and in one of the taxis, out comes the Green Hornet in his little Green Hornet outfit, and Bruce Lee in his little Green Hornet outfit.
Yes. So, okay. So let's talk a little bit about the ending of the scene, because the ending of the movie, because this is confusing. So, it's weird because Bruce Lee is helping the doctor escape, and again, this is when he crashes into the hideout with the rickshaw. He's got his buddy with him, who I thought was a different guy than the Land O'Lakes guy, because I thought he looked a little different, but maybe it's still him. I don't know. They help the doctor escape. Doctor gets taken back, I think, at some point when the clown mimes are attacking Bruce Lee. Then Bruce Lee gets in a fight with Superman. And at this point, is this like a last, climactic scene in the movie? It's Bruce Lee versus Superman. Bruce Lee has nothing to do at this point with the Doctor.
Yeah.
The Green Hornet, apparently, who we haven't seen in an hour and a half, is saving the Doctor, but he's doing so with a woman, an undercover woman who I guess is working with the police / the Green Hornet Syndicate. And then after Superman is defeated, then we see Dr. Ting is rescued by the woman and by the Green Hornet, and then also Kato, who is dressed as the Green Hornet, who is Bruce Lee. I think. You said he was.
Yeah.
I believe
totally
you. That's
is.
what I thought it was, but I wasn't, again, because this makes no sense. I was confused in real time watching this movie.
I was confused in real time. That's the perfect way to describe that. Yeah, the movie made no sense, but it was a hell of a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, so that's Jim. Overall, what did you think of Superdragon versus Superman?
Patrick, the movie made no sense, but overall, it was a really fun watch. What do you think, buddy?
For the most part, I agree. I think there were several scenes that really dragged. Like some of those, again, it's mostly in the middle. Or I guess towards the end. It's the clowns. It's those scenes that just go on. Like, we know there's going to be a fight scene. Why are we just messing around for 5 minutes before there's actually a fight scene? It's sort of the same story as the chase scenes, except the chase scenes, however boring they might be, are more exciting than watching those clowns just jump.
Yeah.
But overall, yes, I did somewhat enjoy the movie. It's stupid. It's fun. The dubbing is atrocious. I got a lot of enjoyment out of Josh Gad and like all these other actors that looked like real celebrities, like the John Madden rapist, and Lionel Richie Superman, who's probably the least. I think John Madden looks more like John Madden, and Josh Gad definitely looks more like Josh Gad than Superman looks like Lionel Richie. But I'll take it. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's not a wall-to-wall entertaining film, but it certainly has its highlights. I thought most of the fight scenes are very well executed for the most part. Mm-hmm. I want to introduce to you, Jim, a new segment on this show, and this will not come up every single episode.
Okay.
But this is something I have not briefed you on this, listeners. No. This is brand new information. But we're going to play a game. It's a game show called Has Quentin Tarantino Seen This Movie? And this is going to be. We're only going to do this for some of the more obscure or forgotten movies, because we don't. If we're talking. Because what are all the movies we know Quentin Tarantino has seen? Like, obviously, he's seen... Like, I'm
Game
talking
of
about
Death.
movies that he's specifically spoken about. Game of Death is... They do the Game of Death suit in Kill Bill. And I know he's said The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the best directed film of all time, which might be his best opinion. I know he's seen the remake of Psycho because he famously said it's better than the original Psycho, which I think by extension means he hasn't seen the original Psycho. I'm going to make that assumption. And that's also the worst film opinion he's ever had. But I want to discuss this with some of our lesser known movies, either obscure or just kind of forgotten movies. I know he's seen Dracula's Daughter, because in the Eli Roth documentary series, A History of Horror or whatever it was called, they were talking about some lesbian vampire movie or something, and this is one of the few times where Eli Roth shut the hell up, because overall my complaint of that documentary series was that Eli Roth spoke more than his interview participants. But like, they're talking about lesbian vampire movies, probably The Hunger with Susan Sarandon and Catherine Deneuve and David Bowie, which is a famous lesbian vampire movie. But Tarantino said, like, the lesbian vampire movies that go back to the 1930s. And Eli Roth's like, really? They do? And then he's like, Dracula's Daughter, because there is a lesbian charged scene in the 1936 film Dracula's Daughter. It's like, okay, I'm glad that Tarantino brought that up, and I'm glad that Eli Roth shut the fuck up for a second so we could hear someone talk about it. But so those are some examples of movies I know Quentin Tarantino has seen. Has Quentin Tarantino seen Emmanuelle?
I mean, he must have, because everybody saw Emmanuelle.
Well, yeah, but it was like a big hit in the 70s. Like, Tarantino is like a 12-year-old kid, right, when it comes out? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, you know what? I like.
Is there enough feet action in Emmanuelle
that's a good question.
pique his interest? That's the question.
There's definitely feet.
Well, every movie has feet. Is Tarantino a big fan of the Flintstones? The Flintstones movie where they use their feet to propel their cars. That's
what's grosser, being turned on by the Flintstones or liking anime? And I don't mean sexually. I mean,
well, there's no other way to like anime. They're all perverts, but I'll say the Flintstones.
Okay.
If you're turned on by the Flintstones, there's something you belong in some kind of
home
place where they're going to lock you up and throw away the key. But yeah, so Emmanuelle, I will say, I think it's more likely that Tarantino has seen Bruce Lee versus Superman than he's seen Emmanuelle, believe it or not.
Now, see, I'd agree with you.
Even though Emmanuelle is the far less obscure film in this case. But this, Bruce Lee versus Superdragon or whatever, this movie is far more Tarantino up his alley than Emmanuelle is. And again, if Emmanuelle had more, foot massage scenes, I feel more confident about Tarantino having seen Emmanuelle.
Well, and I feel like, if you're watching Game of Death and all kinds of schlocky martial arts movies, I feel like this was on his radar at some point.
Well, and I want to say, you mentioned schlocky, and certainly, but can I just say, this makes Game of Death look like North by Northwest. Like North by Northwest
absolutely.
is a high-class film compared to this. or excuse me, Game of Death is Casablanca. It's the classiest of films.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that's something I was going to point out as well. Like Game of Death comes off as a real movie compared to this.
Yeah, it's got the funny Photoshop stuff, but that's all in the first half for the most part. And then you get the 90-year-old dummy getting thrown off the roof with the Bruce Lee scream.
But it also has real Bruce Lee dead in a coffin.
Yes,
which is also
is arguably
which has
more
real Bruce
exploitive
Lee than this movie.
It's more exploitive than anything in this movie. Which I wanted to say. So shit, which movie was this? I have to think. There was a trivia thing I know I saw. But I don't know which of these two movies it was. But okay, so Emmanuelle, overall, the musical score felt very prog rock to me. That 70s kind of prog rock, and I did see that some part of that film uses music from the English prog rock band King Crimson. So I just wanted to point that out for all you King Crimson aficionados out there. I mean, they're not an obscure band. I've never listened to them. But I did want to say, so the music fact, this is IMDb trivia, Superdragon versus Superman. Some cuts of Superdragon vs. Superman contain music from The Return of the Pink Panthers, so the score by Henry Mancini in the Peter Sellers, Christopher Plummer film. And I want to say that was not the cut that was on Tubi, because I would have recognized that music immediately. And I wish we saw that cut, just because I think this type of film deserves to be as exploitive as it can be. We're talking like like the Bruno Mattei movies. He made a lot of Italian horror movies. He made some of the Black Emmanuelle movies, I think, but he made Hell of the Living Dead, which is a zombie film, very much a ripoff of Dawn of the Dead, and it includes the entire musical score from Dawn of the Dead, from the band Goblin, which is completely unlicensed, and I think that's one of the charms of that movie. And I will say the Clones of Bruce Lee, I want to say, has the Rocky theme in it.
Really?
I know it has some music from Rocky. I don't know if it has Gonna Fly Now, the Academy Award-winning song from Rocky, but it has some music from Rocky, I know, and I thought I got a big kick out of that. So I wish we could have seen or heard some rip-off music in this movie. Maybe we did, but it wasn't music that I recognized.
Also, the chase scenes must have been so slow because they were actually filming on roads that were in use, right? Because there's no way they blocked off stretches of highway or anything.
Probably, but it didn't stop the French Connection from creating one of the greatest chase scenes ever, even though they almost killed a baby in the middle of that scene. So it's like there are ways to do good chase scenes on scenes that you don't have the permits to, on roads that you don't have the permits to film on. This movie just didn't pull it off.
They didn't pull anything off.
So, which of these two movies, Jim, do you prefer? Emmanuelle or Superdragon versus Superman?
Definitely Superdragon versus Superman. I say this a lot, and I like the shittier movie, not because it's a better film or it's shot better or anything, but because it was just so enjoyable to watch because of its sheer stupidity and the strange things that were going on in it constantly. It was just such an exciting, enjoyable watch.
All right, now and I'm going to say you're acting defensive here. Now, I have given you some shit in the past because, preferring Deathstalker to Viva Las Vegas, insane. But I'm going to say this isn't insane here. I mean, overall, if you're just trying to sit down and watch a movie, just enjoy yourself, not jerk off, this is the far more entertaining movie than Emmanuelle.
Yeah.
I will say, I like, this is the first time the entirety of this podcast that I'm glad we're doing it remotely because I didn't want to watch Emmanuelle with you and possibly your girlfriend. That would have just been weird.
Yeah, that would have been awful.
But, no, I do prefer Superdragon versus Superman. It just has more stuff that's entertaining to me. Maybe a really, really, really good sex scene with, like, really attractive people might be better than, like, a good fight scene, but I don't know, you get a bunch of fight scenes that are all pretty good, competent, even if a lot of the way things are shot aren't particularly competent. And it's like, I'll take that over, really all Emmanuelle has to offer. I mean, there's a good Sylvia Christel performance, but it's sex scenes and some nice Bangkok locations and stuff. But like that's kind of the appeals of that stuff. So I'm going to go with the far less compelling dramatic film, Superdragon versus Superman, in part also because Emmanuelle isn't as compellingly dramatic as it probably could be or should be.
I'd agree with that. And I also want to say Superdragon versus Superman, this is kind of like our podcast was made to talk about shit like this.
Yeah, this and Pieces and stuff like that, yeah. Like we're going to cover a classy movie here and there, obviously. We've got The Terminator coming up later this season. Like, we've got some big mainstream stuff, but, we want to get some obscure. So we want to talk about some stuff you've never heard of or seen. Maybe we can turn some of you on to watching these films, because this one is on Tubi, so, go check it out. It is under the title Bruce Lee versus Superman on Tubi, I think, or maybe Bruce Lee versus Supermen.
Yeah,
I'm not sure,
think it's
but
Superman.
It's one of those two.
Now, Patrick, how do you feel about this one being a double feature?
I think in a lot of ways this is the worst double feature we've ever had in terms of the films just absolutely do not complement each other, and they're also not that entertaining. Like, we talked about Superdragon versus Superman, like, it's pretty entertaining, but, like, it's not as entertaining as a genuinely good movie.
No.
And then Emmanuelle is, I guess you have to be in the right mood for Emmanuelle, and that right mood is horny mood. As hell. Yeah. So, like, they're not the most entertaining movies overall. Like, so I'm going to say it's not a good double feature, but I do think it has potential as, like, both of these films are kind of fascinating little... I think I used the word curiosity earlier to describe Emmanuelle, and that's... Both of these films are curiosities to me about, like, how weird life was in the 70s, right? Where you have this, like, major porno hit, and then over in Hong Kong we have, Bruce Lee is dead. Let's pretend we have him in this movie. Like, I think those are kind of interesting. They're both maybe niche film movements or genres, but the bruceploitation and then the Emmanuelle, which has its own exploitation movies made around it, the Emmanuelle exploitation, the Black Emmanuelle. I think there's, like, if you really just want to see some of the oddities that the 70s had to offer, I think this is potentially an okay double feature, but, like, overall, like, if you're just looking to watch two movies back to back, no, it's not a good one. Jim, what about you?
Well, as you know, I rarely say any two movies together are good, and
you've gotten better. I think you've overcorrected after I called you out a little bit. Then for a while it seemed like you said like anything was okay as a double feature.
Well, that's what I'm going to say about this one. No,
I think you're easily influenced.
I think I am, and that's my problem. But I will say, like, I agree with you. I don't think they work well together. But it's kind of funny because we have two movies that are similar in as you were describing it.
There's another Seinfeld connection, by the way. There's the rickshaw. I forgot about that. There's a lot of Seinfeld because Kramer and Newman start a rickshaw business where they employ homeless people to drive rickshaws around Manhattan.
That's great. Yeah,
a lot of Seinfeld connections. We got the cat fight. We got somehow we got on the butter shave. That was my doing, and then obviously Rochelle being the big one, and Superman itself is a Seinfeld thing. Oh, Superman's obsessed with Seinfeld. Yeah, he's got a Superman magnet on his fridge. I had heard at one point, I don't think this is necessarily true, but I had heard that there's a Superman reference in every episode because Jerry Seinfeld, like, as a kid, I guess grew up, was a big Superman fan or something. I don't know how true that is, but I know there's like a lot of like there's the Bizarro Jerry.
Yeah.
There's someone is Elaine's Lex Luthor at one point, so like there's some Superman stuff in Seinfeld.
Well, other than the Seinfeld connection, it's funny because these movies are similar. Like as you were saying, they're both curiosities of the period,
right,
and of their own kind of genre. But also, you have two movies that are filmed in the Asian part of the world.
Yeah,
you have two movies that kind of have pacing issues, but one movie breaks out.
I don't know if Emmanuelle has pacing issues. It's just not the most entertaining.
Yeah,
all the way through.
or it's just a slow movie in general.
Yeah, it's a consistent pace, I think.
And you have one movie where spontaneous fights break out, and the other movie, it appears that spontaneous sex breaks out.
Spontaneous borderline rape breaks out.
Yeah, that too.
Sometimes not borderline.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's funny that we have two movies that share some similarities, I guess, but they're on completely opposite ends of the spectrum from each other. So I agree with you. They don't make a good double feature.
So, let's see what we're doing, Jim. All right, so the band is getting back together because we've got The Curse of Frankenstein. We just did The Mummy a few weeks ago. This is director Terrence Fisher back. We got Peter Cushing back playing a scientist. This time he's Dr. Frankenstein rather than an archaeologist exploiting the Egyptian people. And we've got Christopher Lee once again playing the monster. And then we have Ringu, the Japanese Ring movie, the original from the 1998, I think, that kind of started the J-horror craze of the early 2000s. Might not have started it, but I think the Ring, the Naomi Watts movie, I think was like the first big American remake of a Japanese horror movie around that time. So I think that maybe it's the remake that kind of started the remake craze, if you will. But The Ring, pretty interesting movie. Curse of Frankenstein, excellent film. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty good episode, next episode.
Well, it should make up for this one then.
This was a great one. What are you talking about?
It's a joke.